Welcome to the session on ministry, missions, and leadership, self-care when shame looms large. I have been involved in some kind of ministry or mission or leadership thing really since college. Over the last 20 years or so, I've had the opportunity to travel and work and live and do missions in over 20 countries and here in the United States. And so the stories that you're going to be hearing are from my experiences in all of these things. There was a time where I went to teach English in China, or Thailand, for 2 months between my junior and senior year of college. I was there on a trip that was sponsored by my school. I was there with 2 other girls. It was the very southern part of Thailand, which is half Thai Buddhist and half Malay Muslim. And it was 2 months that we were there. We were the only 3 white people in the whole city, and I was so excited. I wanted to explore. This was probably like my 4th country that I'd been to at that time, and I felt like I was living in a National Geographic, like a magazine, and I couldn't wait to get out and walk the city and explore it and see what it was like. So I met the 2 girls that I was going to be on my team with, and I come to find out that one of them really has a hard time getting up before noon. And the other one really doesn't like to be out in the heat of the day. And in southern Thailand, it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity. And to honor the people who were there, we were wearing long sleeves and long skirts. And so my dream of getting out to explore Thailand before we taught at our after-school program, which is what we were going to do every day around 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, was dashed because I was stuck inside a house all day with a girl who was sleeping and another girl who didn't like to go out in the heat of the day. And we weren't allowed to go out on our own. We had to stay together just for safety reasons. The missionaries wanted to make sure we were okay. So there were times where I would talk to them and I would try to figure out ways to, like, what if we get up really early in the morning and have a sunrise walk? It would be before the heat of the day, and maybe you can just get up that one time, girl who can only sleep till noon. By the end of the trip, we came back and we were in Arizona debriefing. And I was standing next to one of the staff members of the missionary sending organization. We were in this really long line for a buffet, and I was really jet lagged. And I don't know if you know what it's like to be hungry and jet lagged. Yeah, it's pretty bad. And so I remember saying to this staff person, "I'm so hungry. Why is this line taking so long?" And she turned to me and she said, "Wow, you really are an angry person, aren't you?" She had already debriefed my teammates, and I came across to them as an angry person. People who know me, who hear that story, are like, "What? That's not you." When I was in China, my first year, I was 22 years old, right out of college, and I was a first-year teacher. And it was the first time in my entire life that I ever pulled an all-nighter. First-year anybody want to going into education? Yeah, wonderful. Biola prepares you really well, and your first year you might be pulling an all-nighter to do your lesson planning. First year in China, I was having a little bit of trouble with my teammates. Wasn't getting good sleep because I was trying for all of my lesson planning. And I was just really missing home. I was struggling. I really wasn't eating that well either because I was having a hard time balancing, like, making food for myself and working and spending tons of time with students. I'm an introvert, but I thought in order to do this mission thing well, I had to spend all of my spare time with people, and that got really wearing. And so there was this one day where I was trying to print something off in color, and the color cartridge wasn't working. And so I pulled the color cartridge out of the printer. That was how that printer worked. It had a little thing, and I was like trying to get it to work. But all of this had built up so big, and I really did get angry. And in one of my very few times in my life where I've actually outwardly expressed my anger, I threw it against the wall. And there was a spray of rainbow-colored ink all over the wall and my bedspread. And I felt really good for a moment. And then a day later, when my teammate came in and went, "What happened?" I wasn't going to tell her that I exploded in anger. I was too ashamed. So, shame. Both of these experiences to me are shame. When I saw a mirror of myself as an angry person, reflected to me my inadequacy, reflected to me something I really didn't want to know about myself. It reflected failure, feeling like kind of an imposter, especially that first year in China, like I'm not really cut out for this, not living up to my own or other people's expectations. I think for me, again, this is a totally autobiographical workshop, so you're going to hear a lot of my stories. For me, I think some of the greatest crucibles in my life have come in the midst of missions and ministry and leadership for the sake of the kingdom. So my hope is that this workshop will provide space for you to be thinking about your own stories where you have engaged in ministry or missions or leadership and where you've experienced that deep, dark sense of inadequacy, failure, shame, and you don't know quite what to do with it. Because I am honestly convinced that for those of us here, and I think all of us here, our leaders and our missionaries and our ministers in our own context, for us to acknowledge our shame and to allow the Spirit to search and know us, and to engage with the reality of what that shame does to us with our unworthiness, I'm convinced that this actually creates space for the Spirit to work, and I'm convinced that it sets us free to better minister. I think that leadership, ministry, and missions is part of our discipleship to Jesus. And I think our discipleship to Jesus is a parallel process. We want to be like the tree on the screen, like the tree in Psalm 1, a tree planted by streams of living water that bears fruit for the kingdom of God. And I'm convinced that as we engage in ministry and service and leadership, that for the Lord Jesus, it's actually a parallel process of discipleship. That for us, as we give out and as we serve for the sake of the kingdom, Jesus is also wanting us to grow our roots deep in him. I think it's a parallel process. So as I'm going to be sharing my stories of ministry, you're going to be hearing me talk a lot about myself. Because I think, and I'm going to try to kind of balance it a little bit with what I saw God do, because he did so many things in and around and through me and my team in all of these contexts. But it's going to feel a little weighted and a little bit might even sound self-centered, because I'm afraid that sometimes we don't talk enough about the growth of the roots, and that that's part of this parallel process of discipleship with Jesus, that we bear fruit, but he also pushes our roots further into the soil, into him. Okay? So, a little pause to clarify the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt, I think, is feeling bad for something that you've done. Okay, it's feeling bad for a behavior. It's feeling bad for opening that website again, or for snapping at your roommate again, or for somehow mistreating a brother and sister again. That's guilt, that conviction that actually can be a good thing for that behavior, because that kind of helps us like put a check on ourselves and think, okay, Lord, I need help with that. I did it again. Shame goes hand in hand with guilt, and sometimes shame exists apart from guilt. And shame is that deep, dark feeling that who you are is wrong. It has to do with your identity. So guilt has to do with your behavior, but shame has to do with your identity. And sometimes I think shame crops up in the context of how we might consciously or unconsciously define success. So when I was in China, one student, I was there for 2 years, one student came to know Jesus. When I left, my team replaced me with one other person. And in the 2 years that my team continued there, dozens of people came to know Jesus. Shame is me thinking, Lord, what did I do wrong? Was I the wrong person to be there, that only one student came to know Jesus? Shame, for me, is the reality that I do a lot of speaking in my job. And there are times where after I've given a talk, I go home at night, and there's this kind of dark sense that looms over me that I might have said something that was not truthful, or that was unbiblical, or that was something that might have sparked somebody to go in a direction that maybe they didn't need to go. Shame in how others are viewing or responding to me. Shame also exists in me through something called the imposter syndrome. It's a very common thing that probably we've all experienced at some point, where you've been put into a leadership position or a ministry position or put on a missions team, and you think, you know what? If they really knew me, they would think that actually I didn't really belong here. When I first got my job, this is my 5th year in my position here at Biola, and when I first got it, it took about 1.5 years for me to believe that God had given me the skills and the abilities and the wisdom and the life experience that could actually contribute, that could actually do okay in this position. That spark of shame sometimes comes when you don't want to be yourself. When you look around and when you think somebody else is doing a better job at something, or is more well-suited for something, or where you see that you fall short of how it looks like somebody else is doing. My sophomore year of college, I went to Jamaica on a mission trip. It was my 2nd time overseas, and this team was full of really cool people. I am a painfully shy person, or at least I have been. I've kind of grown out of that a little bit, but I was painfully shy, especially my first couple years in college. So here I was in the midst of all these cool kids. I have a really hard time with small talk sometimes, and I felt like I couldn't connect. I felt like I didn't belong. I wasn't listening to the right music. I wasn't dressing the right way. I felt disconnected, and I just felt not good. I felt like I was falling short. So we're going to be talking about what this looks like in the context of our discipleship to Jesus. And we're going to be talking about this through something that I've found for myself to be very important, and it is this idea of self-care. And we're going to be talking about it because of this prayer that Paul offers over the Philippians at the very beginning of his book to them. It's chapter 1, verses 3 and following is his prayer, but here's part of what he says. He says, "I am sure of this, that he who began a good work in you will bring it to completion at the day of Christ Jesus." He who began a good work in you, the one who died for you, the one who accepted you, and the one who is calling you into deeper and more service to him, he will work in you. He will bring you to completion until the day of Christ Jesus. He's not going to give up on you. Okay. Self-care. Quick definition, and then I'm going to talk through it a little bit. Self-care is any intentional action you take to care for your physical, emotional, relational, and spiritual health. And I believe that when we're in the midst of shame, it's really important to do this. Take a look at this picture. Maybe you've flown on a plane before. And one of the things that the airline attendants say when you're on a plane is if the plane is about to go down, you put on your own mask before making sure that the person next to you who's a child or who doesn't have the ability to do it themselves, you put on your own mask before you help them. Because you're actually no good to them until you've helped yourself. You're no good to them if you are fainted in the aisle because you don't have enough oxygen in the middle of trying to put on their mask. It's not going to work. You've got to take care of yourself so that you can take care of other people. And actually, this is highly biblical as well. So Exodus 18, Moses is camped with the Israelites outside of Mount Sinai. And his father-in-law, Jethro, has come to kind of check out what's happened. You know, this small tribe of people has been set free from Egypt, and Moses seems to be the one who kind of did it. And so Jethro is there to kind of check things out and see what's going on. And here is what happens when Jethro comes and sees what his son-in-law is up to. It says, "The next day Moses sat to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. And when Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, 'What is this that you're doing for all the people? Why do you sit alone? And all the people stand around you from morning to evening?' And Moses said to his father-in-law, 'Because the people come to me to inquire of God. And when they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I help them to know the statutes of God and his laws.' And Moses' father-in-law said to him, 'What you're doing is not good. You and the people with you are going to wear yourselves out. It's just too much for you. You are not able to do it alone.' And then he says, 'So listen to me. I'm not going to read it just because it's long. But appoint some people. Teach them some of the things that you know. Have them judge the cases, and then you can take care of the hard ones, because that's what's going to be sustainable for you. If you keep sitting here and judging between hundreds of cases, you are going to burn out. It's going to be too much for you. You are a finite person. Do not think that you can meet the needs of all these people around you. You need help. Taking care of our bodily needs, taking care of our needs for rest and for food, crucial. Sleep, exercise, alone time. That means I'm almost done. Just kidding. Let me go turn the light on. Thanks. Sleep, exercise, alone time, others' time, God time, rest time, crucial. The most balanced example of ministry in the context of missions that I have ever seen was when I was in South Africa visiting a missionary from my church. We had taken a team from my church out there, and they divided their time into thirds. 1/3 was for work, 1/3 was for rest, and 1/3 was for celebration. And when I heard that, I thought, that seems a little off. Surely 2/3 is for work, and 1/3 is for rest and celebration. You just combine those things, but no. For them to have a sustainable ministry in a context that was actually really challenging, 1/3 was work, 1/3 was rest, and 1/3 was celebration. And that's how they were going to live the entirety of their lives in a really high-pressure ministry context. This is something that Jesus also modeled for us. In Mark 6, in Mark 5, Jesus had sent all of the disciples to go out and to serve and minister. And in Mark 6, they all came back and they were going to report to him what had happened. And so this is what it says in Mark 6. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. They'd just been in this kind of intense time of ministry. And Jesus said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place by themselves. Jesus knew that they needed rest. Yes, there were crowds and crowds of people who wanted to hear from Jesus and his teaching. And immediately after that, it turned out that the people were hungry. They needed food. But first Jesus said, "Come away with me to a quiet place by yourselves, and let's get some rest." And this was the kind of ministry that Jesus actually modeled for his disciples. Mark is 16 chapters, and there's 9 times in that book we see that Jesus engages in ministry, but then goes away by himself to be with his Father, even to be with his disciples, to rest. Goes back into ministry, goes to rest. 16 chapters, 9 times. That's a really high ratio. In fact, no, it's a little more than half. It's pretty incredible. So through my own life story, I'm convinced that effectiveness in ministry and missions and leadership involves intentionally moving towards physical, spiritual, mental, and spiritual health, taking care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And I think fundamental to self-care, I think what gives us the idea that we are actually valuable enough to engage in self-care is on the spiritual side of things. It's a growing sense of how God views you. If you can grow in seeing yourself through God's view of unconditional love and grace, then saying no is okay. And failure won't rock you. Being disciplined becomes a little bit easier. Letting things go if they aren't perfect will also be a little bit easier. Part of spiritual self-care is growing in understanding the depth of God's unconditional love for you. In my 20 years of experience, I have encountered spiritual warfare in different ways. And I think honestly in really Western ways, the ways that I think Satan works best kind of in American culture and in Western culture. But I wanted to talk a little bit about something that, the ways that I have seen spiritual warfare show up in my life, because I think this is really important. I'm pretty sure I got this schema from our spiritual warfare class here at Talbot. that we might be able to think of spiritual warfare as something happening in the world or in the structures of the world, something happening that's directly from Satan, and something that is really part of our sin nature. So for example, when I think about the sinful structures of the world, I think about the time that I was in Thailand, and in most countries outside of the United States, your cultural identity is intimately wrapped up in your religious identity. So in southern Thailand, to be Malay is to be Muslim, and to be Muslim is to be Malay. It's hard to rip them apart. To be Thai is to be Buddhist, and to be Buddhist is to be Thai. And this is why it makes missions so hard in some countries for Americans who are there, intimately wrapped together. So then when they see me, you're an American Christian. You're an American Christian, like every American is a Christian. And what we see on TV about Americans at that time, it was when Britney Spears was kind of spiraling out of control. So they look at me and they see Britney Spears, oh, you're an American Christian. And that's how Christians act. So part of our job there, if we were to be asked, was to talk with people. In fact, we were instructed not to say, oh, I'm a Christian. We were instructed to say, no, I follow Jesus. Because that word Christian was so connected to American, it had too much baggage with it. That's a structure of the world. I think that Satan uses, so you can see where kind of the circles overlap, that Satan uses to keep people from Jesus. Well, then we have like direct interaction of Satan with us. So again in Thailand too, there was one night where I had horrific nightmares. I'd never had nightmares so bad. And when we woke up the next morning, connected with the two other girls, and they also said, yeah, we had really bad nightmares too. The content was all different, but we all had horrible, like, I feel like I'm half awake and I can't escape nightmares. So we tell the missionary about it, and he says, oh, I think that might be spiritual warfare. I think that might be Satan. Let me pray for you. And the nightmares went away. And then there's our sin nature that we're also kind of fighting against, right? There are things that are in us already that in high-pressure situations, I think Satan can use. So already in me, there existed a little bit of anger, tendency towards resentment, because I have a hard time saying what I need. And so when I don't get what I need, even though I'm not saying what I need, sometimes my resentment can build up, and then that turns into anger or frustration. Anxiety, insecurity, fear, all that's already in me. And then in high-pressure, cross-cultural situations, I think Satan can kind of step on that and use it. Those circles overlap. So for example, my first year in China, I was on a team with an older couple and another single woman. And the older couple was in their 40s or 50s, and they had come to China thinking that if they were to engage together in ministry, then maybe their marriage would be better. They were having trouble in their marriage, and they thought, maybe if we do this, our marriage will get better. Really good intentions, not a good idea. In the meantime, the woman had been an experienced high school teacher in her tiny little town in Canada, but she didn't have a bachelor's degree. And in China, minimum to teach at the university level, to teach English, you need a bachelor's degree. But she didn't know that before she came. So they had come over, and I had come over, and I'm 22 years old, and I've never taught before, and I'm so excited, like I'm really eager, I'm really idealistic. And I was having great experiences in the classroom because it turned out that I loved teaching. And so there was one day where I came back from teaching a class, and I'm walking down the hallway towards their open door, and she, in the meantime, is kind of stuck in the house because she doesn't have a classroom to sit in. She doesn't know how she's going to connect with students. She doesn't know what she's going to do. And that sparked a lot of insecurity in her. So I'm walking down the hallway, and she sees me coming, and I'm like all cheery and bright, like, I can't wait to tell you what happened in the class today. And she looks at me and she shuts the door. Because for her, I was sparking so much insecurity and shame in her. And for me, I experienced that as a deep level of rejection, or it triggered a deep level of rejection that I had felt since my childhood. And immediately a wall goes up. And because I'm not able to say what I think or how that made me feel or to talk to her about it, and because she is really stuck in her anger and frustration and her shame, that wall goes up. And our team dynamic from that point forward was never the same. And it leaked to the rest of us. We weren't able to fix it. And they ended up actually leaving 2 months early from China. And my other teammate and I had to finish teaching the classes. And I'm convinced that not only was that our sin natures, like the things that were already in us, but it was also Satan kind of pressing on that. So when I talk about shame, and when I talk about the necessity that it is to kind of process this and to figure out what's going on internally when you're in missions and ministry and leadership, it's really to kind of head off some of this warfare that happens. Now with that, I also want to say, this morning Kurt Thompson said this, that evil does its best work in the middle of good work being done. Just because a bad thing happened there in China doesn't mean that God wasn't doing good work. It just meant that we are all on this parallel process of discipleship, that God is working through us, but also he's discipling us and teaching us. So self-care, any intentional action to take care of yourself. And in my life, the most important self-care that I've had to engage in is the emotional, relational self-care. It's being able to learn how to say what I need. It's being able to talk to someone honestly about what's going on, especially in a relational kind of capacity. Before I go on, I'd actually like to give you about 10 minutes to consider your own story. If you have a journal, I'd invite you to take it out, or if you want to take notes on your phone, or if you just want to sit and think about this. But I'm convinced that one of the ways to begin addressing our shame is to actually get it out, to shed light on it, to bring it into the light. And so I want to give you a chance to start doing that. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to kind of go through these steps, to identify an experience of shame and write about it. Concretely, what was the situation? When did it happen? Who was involved? Where were you? What feelings came up for you? And articulating those feelings, I think, is especially important. What story did you tell yourself? So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes, and then I'll come back up. I can remember times of being kind of in the middle of that dark sense of shame and praying this, Lord, would you please just take this away? It's overwhelming. And if you got to that feeling question, you might experience that too. You might be experiencing that right now, like, God, please just take this away. It's dark and it's deep and it feels horrible and I don't want to be here anymore. For me personally, there are times where God maybe has brought a little bit of peace or maybe alleviated some of the heaviness. But I think actually what the Lord has invited me into is more of this kind of a prayer. Lord, will you search me and know me? And I think part of the reason he hasn't wiped away or magically taken away some of those feelings and some of that kind of dark sense of shame that I've experienced is because then I've been invited into a conversation with him about what's underneath that shame, about what's really going on in the depths of my heart. And I also think that part of why he didn't magically take it away is because I needed to learn how to open up and be vulnerable with other people. I needed to learn how to build a community around myself and to be part of somebody else's community who could help care for me when I'm in that kind of dark place, and that I could be someone for them to help kind of care for them when they are in that dark place. The Lord created us to be community. He created us to be relational. You heard that this morning if you came to our opening session with Kurt Thompson, and I think he's going to talk about it more tonight. In Ephesians 4, Paul tells us that he gave us the body of Christ to build us up in love and to speak truth to each other. In James 5:16, James exhorts us to confess to each other and pray for each other. And in 1 John 4:21, John encourages us to love each other. I think part of what can alleviate that sense of shame is to be seen and to be known in that depth of kind of the darkness, and to realize that that person's not going to walk away. So I'd encourage you to think about who you might tell the story to that you thought about or that you wrote down. Who's going to be someone? Maybe it's somebody older than wiser than you, because maybe you know this might be too much for one of my peers. Or maybe you think, actually, I know someone right now who could hear my story and who would just listen to me and hear some of the feelings that I'm feeling. I needed community when I was in China, processing the suicide of one of my students. I needed community in Thailand. I needed that missions worker to tell me, you kind of have an anger problem, don't you? I needed that. And when I was in Jamaica and feeling so inadequate on this team of really cool people, I needed one of them. I needed one of the girls to say, hey, I'm really glad you're here. Did you see those kids and how much they really like hanging out with you? So who is one person that you can tell your story to? A lot of our shame can be cared for in this way. A lot of it. And there were some places in my story, some places in my life where I needed even more than a community of people around me. I needed more professional help. So I want to talk to you a little bit about 3 significant resources here at Biola that can be of great help for you, because sometimes these get confused with each other, and sometimes I think we're unaware of all that's available to us. First one I want to talk about is counseling. The purpose of counseling is to equip you to navigate and cope with the challenges of daily living, and it focuses on your relationships with yourself and with family and with others. And here at Biola at the BCC, it's going to be the cheapest counseling you will ever receive in your life, $20 a session. Outside of this campus, it's like $100 a session, so it's well worth it to take advantage of it here. I desperately have needed therapy in my life to understand where that anger comes from in me, and to understand why it's so hard for me to express anger. Anger in my family system was destructive, so I learned early on, don't be an angry person. And so I would stuff and stuff and stuff and stuff until it occasionally gets out, and I feel so ashamed that it happened. I needed therapy to help unpack that and to figure out what was going on. I needed therapy when I was coming home from China to work through my feelings of inadequacy and failure from leaving the mission field. I needed therapy a lot, so highly recommend it. Spiritual direction. Spiritual direction, the goal is to help you discern God's work in your daily life. It focuses on your relationship with God. Generally meet once a month. Sometimes it's free, sometimes there's a small fee for your director. Here's when I most needed spiritual direction. The reason I left China was because I was engaged to be married. 2 months after I came home, the engagement broke off. And after months of therapy and spiritual direction, I kind of did both at the same time. I remember sitting with my spiritual director and saying, getting to the deepest, darkest core of shame that I could experience, or that I was experiencing. And it was centered around a couple of questions. Did I leave the mission field because I so badly wanted to be married? And did I agree to marry this person who turned out to be not a good person? Did I agree to marry him because I thought that being engaged would finally prove to myself and to other people that I was valuable? And then I left the mission field because of this, and so was God disappointed with me. I needed to process that both in therapy and in spiritual direction. I needed to kind of get to the bottom of that deep, dark question that if I had kept inside would have mushroomed and impact negatively, I think, the ministry that God has called me into today. I had to unpack all that. Pastoral care. Purpose is to share and receive prayer for a particular concern. Stress, relationships, sexuality, doubt, emotional struggles. Immediate spiritual guidance is kind of the focus. We'll meet whenever you need it, and you can email any one of us. Go to this website if you want to meet and pray with one of us. I needed pastoral care when I was in Thailand. I needed prayer for those nightmares. I needed pastoral care. The missionary organization when I was in China sent a person out to meet with our team to help us process the suicide of that one student. I've needed pastoral care a lot in my life. 3 resources that I think are incredibly helpful and important, and I would highly recommend that you get plugged in as part of your community of care. Community of care, network of care, and professional help. Now, I had a feeling that probably a lot of you who come into this room love helping people, and so I wanted to throw in this extra bit for free when I get there. There are times where you just are going to have to know your limits. I've needed to learn my own limits. Go back one more slide. There are times where you're going to be talking to somebody in your ministry, or maybe here at Biola, and they're going to be talking about harm to self, they're going to be talking about harm to others, or sexual assault, or they're going to be talking about something that, for some reason for you, the burden is so big you're not sure what to do with it. You are finite. You are probably not trained to handle any of these things. I'm actually not trained to handle most of these things, but I know where to send people. Get somebody else involved. You can be one person in that person's struggle and in their desire for health and in whatever they're dealing with. You can be one support, but that person needs a network of support. You're probably not equipped to handle some of the depths of what they need, so get them professional help. And then if it has to do with eating disorders, anxiety or depression, or behavior that sounds like addiction, again, That's a place to get professional help. Okay? So I threw that in there because I thought probably a lot of you guys like helping people, and this is a really important thing to know. Okay. So a few final thoughts, and then I'll let you go. I wanted to remind you that God can and will use you along the way. As you become more aware of your shame, it can feel deep and dark and cold, and at the same time, God uses you. Our engagement in ministry and missions and leadership is a discipleship process, and it's a parallel process. We bear fruit, and the Lord teaches us more about ourselves. And he teaches more about ourselves. The Spirit works more and more in us to transform us so that we can bear more fruit. I'm convinced of that truth. Second thing, if you remember anything that I say, is this question: who are you going to tell your story to? Who are you going to talk about that deep, dark sense of shame with? Maybe someone here in this room, maybe someone at your church who's older and wiser, maybe a faculty member or a staff member. But tell somebody. Because I am absolutely convinced of the truth of our theme for Torrey Conference, that when you talk about your shame, and when you get community involved, and when you process with them and with God, then you are released to be known for exactly who you are. And that sets you free to see, to be better able to minister to those around you.
Biola University prepares Christians to think biblically about everything, from science to business to education and the arts. Learn more at biola.edu.